Hello, welcome to our first talk. This week we're going to introduce React and some of the tools we're going to use and environment we're going to use to develop React apps. So where I'm going to start today is going to jump in and we are going to introduce React. So let me just get back to my first slide here. Excellent. All right, so today we want to introduce React, and what I'm going to do in this talk is just give you a little bit of a background about React and why we're looking at it. We'll talk a bit about MVC just very quickly, right, and how React fits into the whole kind of landscape of web app development technologies. I'm going to introduce this idea of what TypeScript extension language is, JSX and TSX, and also we'll start talking about React components as well. So that's what we're going to do in the next in this talk, right? In later talks, I'll talk about the developer tools and material design this week. So what is React? It's a JavaScript framework, more like a JavaScript library, to be honest, for building dynamic web user interfaces. Essentially what we're talking about here is single page apps. We load one page into the browser and that changes dynamically, right, using JavaScript. It was created by Facebook, who are now Meta, and it's been open sourced since 2012. So it's quite a mature library, right? It's been around for a while, right? It's a client-side framework, as in client-side library, JavaScript library, really. Okay, and the reason you might be wondering, why are we looking at React? You're probably aware it's not the only show in town for developing web applications, dynamic web applications. But it is the most popular one, right? So it's the most popular framework, particularly in web application development. And that's why it's a good idea that we look at it, right? You can see here, I have in the rankings here, it's Node and React are by far the most popular frameworks and libraries used out there for developers for web application development. So it's not a bad idea, and I think it's quite beneficial for you to have a knowledge of React. Okay. So what was there before React? Where did React come out of? Well, the MVC pattern, model view controller, you may have heard of that before. That was the convention for web app design. So the model, represents the data or business logic. The view is the presentation layer for the application, and then the controller processes user input, interacts with that user input, and then decides what data should be displayed in the view, right? So AngularJS follows this kind of pattern, as well as many other web app dev frameworks as well. React is not MVC. In fact, React is just the view. It's just based around user interfaces, right? And it challenged the best practice which was MVC, or some variation of it, in this area in web app dev, right? And in fact, in the view, if you look at, say, Angular and some of the other technologies there, Ember and things like that, Backbone, templating is widespread, is used a lot there to describe views, right? React doesn't use templating. React is based on components, right? So what is a React component, right? So the philosophy in React is we build components, not templates. The kind of templating is kind of combined into the component. It's all about the user interface. It's not focused on business logic or the data model, which is kind of where MVC is, what happens in MVC. What we do is we build components, and the component combines a user interface description, which we would do in HTML, and which you guys are familiar with behavior, which we can program with JavaScript, okay? And these two aspects, the description and behavior, are tightly coupled and co-located in a React component, okay? Things like Angular, other frameworks, pre-React, they would have decoupled these, and that would have been seen as a good thing, I guess, right? So you separate your view from your behavior, from your business logic, right? But React decided to combine them together, and there are some benefits to this. Improved composition. So you're composing your behavior with your UI description as well, composing them together, right? And also, one thing about React is, this promoted a lot in React, is reusability. Um, React, a lot of React apps are developed from a library of components. And what you'll find actually when you do your assignment for this module as well is that you'll have the ability to use third-party components, React components, developed by other developers in your own app. So you get that reusability because it combines in the behavior and the description into one component that composed into the component. So hopefully you'll see that. So that's the reason why React went this way, and it kind of broke with the convention of MVC or some variation of it, which every other framework generally followed at the time. Okay, so TypeScript. React is a JavaScript framework, right? But we're going to be using TypeScript, right? And it allows us. It has its benefits. I know you've used TypeScript already in Full Stack 1, so that's good. So you're familiar with it, right? And the benefits that you get with TypeScript are what you have. It's the same as what you've had with Full Stack 1, I guess, as well. You get type safety. We get static typing. We can catch errors early. It's better developer experience. We're going to be using VS Code here, and we can get auto completion and all these kind of nice tools features that we have in IDE, because we'll be defining interfaces and types, so it'll help us with that, and better code quality and maintainability as well. That's always a good thing, right? So that's what TypeScript gives us, right? And we can include it in React by using these libraries here. The thing about TypeScript is React is JavaScript. So we have to transpile or compile our JavaScript to run in the browser or compile. So we need some way of doing that. So I'll come back to what I mean by that a little bit later on, right? About converting or transpiling your TypeScript code into JavaScript code and how that happens and how that works. Okay. So I want to get into the code, and I want to start using React. Right? And to help me do that, I've created some demos for the lecture. They are on the website. Let me just see if I can jump into that website here. Bear with me one sec. I can show you where it is. Here we are. Right. So if I drag this over here, we can have a look. So this is our first topic here, Introduction to React, and you'll see in here this resources card here. If you click on that, that will download the examples I'm just about to cover with you now. Okay. The other thing is, look, there's a little video up there too. See it there, right? So if you have a look at that video, it'll show you how to get up and running, get these examples working on your own machine at home. Okay. So just to let you know, that's where that is. Right, so let's jump back into the slide deck here again. So this archive is up there, and it has a couple of examples here. And the first thing I want to do is, as I said, React is all about the user interface. So how do you create a user interface description in React, in JavaScript, right? So we have to use the React create element method here. So this creates a new React element of a given type. And also, we need a way of, once we create our elements, right, we need a way of getting them into our web application, into our DOM, right? So we use the React DOM.createRoot method, right? So this is used to attach a created element to existing DOM or node. So let's have a look at the two of these, because I think it's important to know what's happening with these. And let's look at React create element first, the create element method, right? Or function, whatever you want to call it. This takes 3 or more arguments, at least 3, right? So let's talk about what they are. So let's just dive straight into the code here and have a look at it. So I have my React libraries here. I'm using them here. My script is referring to the React and React DOM JavaScript libraries. Okay, and you can see here I'm creating if I want to create an element, right? An element, and I want to do this. I'm doing this imperatively. I'll talk about that. What that is in a minute. I can do it this way. So I use the create element. The first thing I pass in here is that I have 3 arguments here. You'll notice here with create element takes 3 arguments, right? At least 3 or more arguments. So the first argument is the type, right? So the type argument, in this case, it's the tag name. So this just defines what type this element is, it's going to be a header element, h1. So you can see here, this is like your HTML tag, right? Description, right? So that's what I'm doing here, right? The tag name here. So it can be, h1, div, span, whatever you want, right? Also, I can define the second argument defines the properties that this element will have, right? So, so the properties here, in this case, I'm defining just the class name of it here for CSS, for styling. Also, I could define event handlers in here, things like that. And all that, and then finally here we have our children. So this is the children of this element, right? That will be in our app. So in this case, it's just language, the text that's going to appear in the heading, the header, H1, right? So it's languages, right? It's languages here. But that could be zero or many child elements. We'll see that in a minute again, a little bit more clearly, hopefully, right? Now, to be honest with you, we don't use create elements. This is kind of vanilla React. And it's probably a good idea to understand this is what's happening. We don't use create element function directly, right? This is too cumbersome to be doing this, writing this code out all the time. You could if you want, but we don't do that. But more about that later when we get to TSX, okay? The React DOM create root, right? So what does this do, right? So this, as I said, is used to attach your created element to an existing DOM node. So you know yourself that hopefully you've come across what the DOM is, right? It's the programming interface for web documents. So it allows us to get at our web page programmatically. Think of it that way, right? And it represents a page so that programs can interact with that page and change things on that web page, right? And this is where essentially what I'm doing here with the React DOM create root. This is where your React application will be attached or mounted into the document object model. So you can see it in the code here. I'm using React DOM object create root, and then look, I'm using that document get element by ID. You've probably come across this before in some other web dev modules, right? The DOM element which to render your React root element. So I want to render it onto mount point here with the element that has ID mount point, right? And then I just call root element.render root, right? So root is we won't see it here, but this is a React element that component that I want to render onto this root element, right? So look, it's better to kind of have a look at this. So I'm going to have a look at some examples. So there's some demos here, and I advise you to look at the demos. I'm going to kind of jump in here and have a look at the demos so I can show you what I mean about some of the stuff I've talked about there, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I just flicked up this web page here, this web app, right? We're going to create a very simple, all the examples that I put up there in class examples, just create the same page, this very simple web app that has a languages header here that has a little bit of simple styling in it, and then an unordered list of languages, JavaScript, Java, and Python. So let's see how I would do that using vanilla React, right? How I create a user interface description that describes this using React. So if I jump into the code here, okay, and let's go back to our code. Let's look at example one. So these are the examples that are up on the, as I said, you can download and have a look at yourself. So this is the first user interface description. So you can see here, it's just a HTML page, right? And I'm going to use the React. You see here, I'm referencing the React library here and the React DOM library here. This is what I'm going to use to describe this interface, this user interface description in React. And then I have my own script down here. So have a look at the web page here at the moment, right? It has a very simple, it's referencing a very simple style sheet here. That's down below here. You can have a look at it. And then in the body here, I have one div element here, right? And this is just with ID of mount point, right? So this is going to be where I'm actually going to create, create my root. This is going to be where my essentially React app will be contained within this div element, okay? And then in my script down here, look at this. I'm going to create my elements imperatively with react.createElement. So as I said, we don't usually use this, but it's good to see how it works so that you'll understand what's actually going on underneath the bonnet when you create React apps. So if I look back at that web page, what I need is a header that we just looked at a minute ago, right? I need this header element, a H1 element to do this, and then I need a list, an unordered list of list items, and these list items are JavaScript, Java, and Python. So how would I do that using React? So I create, I'm using that create element. Look, that create element function from the React object here, which is coming from this library that I'm bringing in with scripts, the scripts element here. So look, I'm creating a header element, right? That's the type. Remember I talked about this in the slide. That's the type. Okay, H1. Okay, I'm putting in a little bit the properties here. So I'm giving it a class name. So you notice I'm using class name. You would be familiar with class when you're using CSS before you just used class. We use in Java or in React, we use class name, and that camel case there to define a CSS class for an element, right? So it's heading. And then at the bottom here, we have the children, right? 0 or more children. So in this case, it's just languages, right? That's the text that's contained in the H1 element that we're creating. So there's my header React element, right? And then I have my items, right? So my list items, so item 1 and item 2 and item 3, I'm using create element here to create those. It's a list item. So li, these are just your HTML tag names, right? List item, right? I'm not applying any properties here, just null. And then JavaScript, Java, and Python. So those 3 there. And then my list. This is where the children, we define more than one child here for this one. So look at here. When I define my list, my unordered list here, when I create an unordered list here, React element, unordered list, no behavior, there's no properties here, but look, these items that I've created here, they are the children. So, you know, in your unordered list, you have list item 1, list item, a couple of list items. There you are, item 1, item 2, item 3. Okay, and then finally, in my root, look what I do here. This is my root element, right, for my whole React app. It's a div, right? So I'm kind of putting everything into a div element, containing it in a div element. It has some properties there, class name of pad for CSS for styling, and then I have my header, right? And then after my header, I have my list, right? Which is this unordered list of list items, right? So hopefully you see how that coding, how that works, right? Then finally, I have my root element here. I need to mount that. I need to mount that into the DOM. So like I said on that slide before, I use the create root function of the React DOM object here that's coming from this library, right? Document get element by ID mount point. So I want to stick this root element into my DOM here, right? There's my div, right, with ID. So it's going to be put in there, and then I want to render it, right? I have to call it render here. So there's my root element, and then I get my root element, right, for it. And then root element.render, and I want to mount or render this root element in here, right? Hopefully that makes sense. To see working, this is it working here. By the way, you know, I've started up, you can see down the bottom here, I've started a little local web server here, so we can see these HTML pages here and see how React works here with like using React imperatively, right? And you can see it's working there, right? So there's you'll see this in the video. I put a video about how that works in the attached to the examples this week. So React. So there's the web page rendered, okay, in my browser. Okay, if I want to go back here, let's go back. I'm gonna go back here. If I want to see, this is that creating each element, React element, and then you know you putting that mounting that into the DOM here. Here's this exact same page. We're doing it a little bit differently here. We are nesting, right? We're nesting create element calls here. So I do exactly the same thing here. So I create this root element, right? Which is a div, and it has its properties here, it's styling. And then look in here, then when I look at the 0 or more child, where I define the child elements for this element, I'm defining my header first, you know, H1, okay? And then I'm creating my unordered list. And within my unordered list, I'm yet again nesting the list items. 1, 2, 3, right? JavaScript, Java, and Python. And then as before, I'm using the create root method of the React DOM, right, to define my root element, and then I render this root, this create element, this React element into this root element, which is of course, right. And just to show you that works, let's just get rid of this for a sec. And if I go back up here, again on my local browser here, again, as I said to you, I talked that these are all my examples. If I look at this description, it looks exactly the same. It's just done slightly differently, right? Just to show you how that, how imperative React works. So just to hop back into the slides and talk a little bit about that. You saw that there where we can nest create element calls. So there's just some demos of how you can implement a React app, what we call the imperative way. And what do I mean by imperative? Well, this is where we use, programming statements that change the program state. So we focus on describing how the program operates step by step, right? Using code. How I did it there is not the general way it's done, right? As I said before, declarative programming is a programming paradigm where we can express, we can focus on what the results should be without specifying how we should achieve the results. So imperative program, everything is done. We use statements that change the program state, and it's done in a step-by-step way. Declarative program allows us to kind of describe what our user interface will look like, right? Without specifying how we achieve this results. And that's a nicer way of doing it. And how can we do this? We can use something called TSX, TypeScript XML, or JSX. It's an extension of JSX, right? So it retains the full power of TypeScript. So we can use TSX where it kind of retains all the benefits we get from TypeScript, like I talked about before. And it allows, a tight coupling between user interface behavior and user interface description. So this is what it looks like here. So the same example I just described before, we could do something like this, where again, we define our root element like this, constant root, but rather than using that create element, calling React create element all the time to create every single element in it, we just write it as it should be displayed, right? Using the HTML. Look, see that there? So the div, class name, iPad. So you might notice that, why is that class name instead of class? Well, React classes, instead we use class name because it's a programming language, class is a kind of reserved word, right, for programming classes, right? So class name to define for your CSS kind of classes. And that describes the user interface much easier, right? And we can use this. But it's not unfortunate, it's just the way it is. If we want to use it, this is not JavaScript, right? And so it'll have to be transpiled before it's sent to the browser. So just to show you what I mean by that is there is another example in here. Let's go back to our examples. All right, and what the example we're talking about now is our TSX error example here. I'm going to click on this HTML page. And nothing, right? And if I go into my console here, we might get an indication of what's wrong. And you can see a syntax error on unexpected token. The reason why, so if we look at the code, right, let's go back to our code. So if we look at the TSX error, so again, this is an example. So in the script, look what I've done here. I've put in what you just saw on the slide there. So I'm declaratively describing what the user interface should look like. Declarative programming, right? This is what I want. This is what the end result should look like. And then what I'm doing then is I'm trying to render this, right, onto the root. But this isn't JavaScript, right? So when this gets loaded into the browser, it doesn't know. That's why we get that syntax error. Let me just jump back. See that? Unexpected token, yeah, it's falling over here. This is not JavaScript. So what we need to do here is it needs to be transpiled. All this stuff needs to be transpiled. Okay. So transpiling, how we can do that? One way we can do that is use something called Babel. You might have come across this on a previous module. I think I have Babel open here. So let's have a look and see if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. So let's drag this over here. This is Babel. And what I can do here is I can put in code. I'll not talk about too much about Babel because it's going to be done automatically for us anyway. And we want to take that script out of there. Okay. But you can see here, what I can do here is I can pass in these are the kind of configuration for the transpiling Babel. Well, compiles or transpiles from one code source to another, right? And transpiles or compiles into JavaScript in this case. So look, what I'm doing here is I'm selecting React and TypeScript, right? These are my presets. We'll talk about stage 0. This is just kind of to give us the latest, and I'm going to use their classic React runtime. I could do the automatic one, which is the more newer one, but this relates to what we've seen already before. So look, there's my TypeScript, right, for React, right? This is how I describe my user interface. And this is essentially a JavaScript. This is transpiled into this JavaScript here. And you can see here, it's kind of what you've seen already before in the first example we looked at, that imperative way, right? We've got we're using create element. It's creating an element div with a certain class name. So there's my 1, 2, 3 arguments. And then you see for this element, you can see here all the children. So it's creating my heading there, and then it's creating the unordered list. So it's using create element. So this is JavaScript. So if I take that, okay, and I go back to my web page and I replace, if I did replace it, if I go back in here and I replace, TSX error, if I replaced all this script with what was transpiled there, then it would work. And in fact, that's kind of what's done here, except I've just put it in its own scripts now, referencing it here. So JS, so you can see it up here. If I go into the JavaScript folder here, pre-transpile, this is what we have. And then what I used is Babel, right, to transpile it, okay, into this code here. And that's what's getting used in this example, 04, right, TSX, this one here, .html. And just to show you here, if I go to my browser, again, you can do this yourself, just to convince yourself that it works. If I click on that, there's my web page again. This time, this is using transpiled TypeScript, okay? And that's going to be automated for us, so don't worry about it. You won't have to do this every time you create a React app. We'll have tooling that'll do this for us. But I'm going through this now because I feel it's a good idea that you understand what's going on. So this is what I did here, right? So I went into Babel here and the online to try it out here just to see how transpiling works. I kind of did my settings and my configuration here. It's React TypeScript stage 0, the kind of Strawman latest version of it. I put in my TypeScript here, my TSX, right? And then this is my output here. That there is my transpiled code. All right, and that's what we use. That's what's used in the web browser, right? But that needs to happen before, before your React app is loaded into a web browser. So a little bit about TypeScript. Let's talk about it, right? So it actually comes from JSX, right? JSX is a file syntax. It's an extension used by React, right? It resembles HTML and allows us to write our UI components in a HTML-like style. So it allows us to do declarative program rather than that imperative thing using React.createElement all the time. So you can see it here as a nice example of a React application, or a React component here, right? Where we can describe it. Essentially, you can write it like in a HTML-like way, in a declarative way. That's nice. That's kind of nice. And then that can be transpiled then before we actually use the React app in a browser, okay? TSX is just a TypeScript version of JSX, right? It's a superset that adds static typing in JavaScript, so we get all the benefits of TypeScript when we're doing our JSX, when we're describing our user interfaces. So, it forces us to kind of comply to whatever interfaces we've defined, typing, all that kind of thing, right? And there's some minor HTML tag attribute differences. Remember I said this, I pointed this out to you. We use class name instead of class, right? And a HTML4 instead of 4, right? This is because this is so it won't clash or won't kind of conflict with what we mean by class in programming, right? In JavaScript, and the same with 4. Okay, so it's good, right? It works. So it allows the UI description to be coded in a declarative style, and this is the way we will go, and this is the way everybody goes with React, right? and be in line with TypeScript. So TSX is the way we will go, right? And so it combines essentially you could think of it as combining templating, which you might be familiar with already, with the power of TypeScript. So that's what we're at here, right? So I talked about TSX transpiling. So browsers don't do TypeScript, so it needs to be transpiled into JavaScript. And I showed you a very simple example of that just previously. So we can use the Babel platform or Babel libraries to do our transpiling for us if we want, or else we can use the Vite library, right? And that's our Vite, should I say? We can use the Vite library to do it. So how are we going? How can we do this? So we can do it manually. So when experimenting and just learning about transpiling, it's not a bad idea to do that, and you can mess around with it yourself if you want. Okay, but really the way we want to do it, we want to use an instrumented web server. So the Vite library has it built into it. It's part of its function. So this is ideal for development, and this is what we'll use, right? So an instrumented web server like Vite will do this for us, so we can write our components in TSX, and then when we want to actually test them and view them and use them, Vite will automatically transpile them or compile them into JavaScript before they're used in the browser. And also when we want to create our app, we can use a bundler tool as part of the build process. So when we have our React app and we want to publish it or build it, then it's Vite again has it built in, so the transpiling is part of that build process if you want to release an app, right? Where TypeScript is transpiled into JavaScript. Okay, so it's done and it's production standard, right? So just to finish out there, that's just a very brief introduction to components and a little bit about the React library, and you can see how it works and TSX and how TSX relates to that, right? And transpiling and compiling. We develop components in React. That's what we're going to be doing, right? And a component is a TypeScript function that returns a user interface description. E.g., what I'm talking about here is TSX, TypeScript extension element, or which will be converted to JSX, right? So we can reference a component like a HTML tag, right? And that gets a little bit more, I think it's more intuitive, particularly if coming from a web dev environment. So what this is an example of here. So I can define a root element, so I can React DOM create root document.get element by ID. We have our mount point. So when I have my React DOM, when I have my React app, right, and I want to load a React component into the DOM, right, or mount it onto it, this is how we'll do it. We've seen this already, where we create root, create element by, this is our mount point in our HTML page, where we want to put our React app or React components. And then all we do is read element.render and then look dynamic language. So we can reference components like a HTML tag. So we develop components and then we reference them like a HTML tag, right? And the reference for this, if we let's have a look at it. Example 5 this week, simple components. So let's go back to our browser again, and just to show you what I mean by that. You'll see it here, I think. Yep. Example 5, simple components. Wow, looks exactly the same as the other ones, but the code is different. Let's have a look at the code, right? So if we look at 5 simple component, you can see here I'm referencing in again, this is the exact same HTML as what was in here, right? Pretty much, right? Except see my mount point here. The only difference is we're referencing a different script here. So our simple component transpiled. Let's have a look at what's in there, right? So you'll see it here. Look. So I have sorry. Let's have a look at the source of it, should I say? So you should see here I've defined this dynamic languages constant, right? This is our React component, and it's a function. It's a functional component. Now I haven't typed it, but just for example purposes, you'll see how it works here. And you can see here, look what I'm returning. I'm returning TSX, TypeScript extension language. So there's my look. There's the description of my. So this functional component is returning a UI description, user interface description, and that's defined using TSX, right? So that's good, right? And then you can see here in my root element, that's like before, create root, document get element by ID, mount point, and then root element.render, and look, see the way I'm rendering it? dynamic languages, HTML like tags. So it's like it's a HTML element, right? My own one. That's our React component there, dynamic languages component. See it there, right? So there it is. There, I'm defining the function there. It returns TSX, right? It returns a TSX. TSX. It's a user interface description with TSX. Okay. So that's it. That's and then down in my in the code here, look at it there. That's the same as before. Before that's the source. If I put that in, and I'm not going to do it now, if I transpiled this, right? If I took this and put it into React and or into Babel and I transpiled it, there's the HTML for it all there. Like, so it's not, that's actually not prettied or anything like that, but that's what it would look like. That's the JavaScript version of that component. Okay. But that's a key thing there, like how that is a functional component, a React functional component. That's how we render it out. Look, we can reference it like a HTML tag. So that's what I'm talking about there, right? So we reference a component like a HTML tag, right? And you can see it there in that bowl there. That's how we're doing it. Okay, so look, that's the first video. That's all I want to talk about. In the next video, we'll go a little bit further into components a little bit and how we can program them a bit better. But that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video.